my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kyle Whipple. Dr. Whipple is in his 5th year as an assistant professor in education for equity and justice. He graduated from the University of Minnesota with a PhD in STEM education in June of 2018, with a focus on LGBTQ plus inclusion in science and mathematics. His research interest is focused on LGBTQ plus teachers and their implementation of inclusive pedagogy and curriculum, specifically using critical care theory. He started the LGBTQ plus Teacher Mentors organization in 2019 to create a social network connecting pre-service and in-service teachers who identify as LGBTQ plus. He taught science and mathematics in public schools for 20 years, and he identifies as a queer trans man. The title of the presentation, which you can see on the screen behind me, is Faculty and Staff Retention, the Importance of Social and Professional Safety Nets. And I just want to note that we'll have some time after Dr. Whipple's presentation for questions. So those of you in the audience, please think about your questions. And for those of you online, please use the chat function to share your questions. And our graduate assistant, Max Clark, will read those to Dr. Whipple. And one request for you with respect to those questions, if the audience members ask questions, Dr. Whipple, please repeat them for the benefit of our online viewers. So please join me in a hearty welcome for Dr. Kyle Whipple.
All right, well, welcome. So given all of the LGBTQ plus inclusion mentioned in that introduction, you might be wondering why I'm talking about faculty and staff retention. But it turns out that there's actually a fairly substantial overlap between what it means to implement something like critical care theory, which relies a lot on mentorship and making people feel welcome in a space, and faculty and staff recruitment and retention. Specifically, the area of mentorship gets overlapped a lot. So we'll talk about that quite a bit. Last year, I lose track of the years because I'm super old. So the 2021-2022 school year, academic year, I guess, I was the leadership fellowship winner for the College of Education and Human Sciences. And my project specifically focused on this idea of staff recruitment and retention because the Department of Education for Equity and Justice went through a large turnover, in part due to COVID, but also just in part due to the baby boomers retiring right now. So when I was hired on in the fall of 2018, we had 13 members in our department. Between then and the spring semester of 2020, which you remember is when we went, shut it down, nobody gets to move. And then we went, everything's going to be online. And then eventually we went, well, some of it'll be online, some of it'll be in person, but we all have to be 6 feet apart. All of that combined to shrink our department down to 6 people. Again, between natural retirements that we knew were going to come and folks who went, yeah, I'm not doing that, so I'm going to retire. It just really collapsed. And so we were doing a lot of hiring, and we were doing a lot of talking about what does it mean to keep people in a department and to keep a department stable. We developed a new name right before that shutdown. Literally, I think it was that semester that we implemented the new name. And so we implement a new name, and then over half the department exits, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we have this new name, but we also need new folks. And what is that new name, and what is our new mission, and what are our new goals relative to what these new folks think is important? So one of the first things I looked into is, why do people leave, right? During COVID, we know why people left. People left because they didn't want to have to teach online. They didn't want to deal with hybrid, which it took about 2 days worth of trying to teach hybrid before all of the teachers and professors went, hybrid is, 200 times more work than either all online or all in person, because I'm doing 2 things at once constantly. And that's a really hard shift to make. So during COVID, we could really easily do this. This made people leave. They didn't want to teach in hybrid. this made people leave. They didn't know how to keep track of all the paperwork that was coming in. That was really easy. But in general, what does it mean for us right now in 2023 for people to leave, right? We live in a different world post-COVID than we did pre-COVID. A lot of things have shifted, not the least of which is geographic mobility. We found out that lots of jobs can happen from home, and we found it out rather quickly. And some people really liked it. Now, the folks who had the toddlers were probably not as happy as the folks who have the kids in college or the kids who are out of the house on their own. But there were some folks who went, this is pretty sweet. I've got a dress shirt on, but I'm working in shorts because people are only going to see me from, mid waist up. So it has opened up more jobs and opportunities, even for professors. So when we even think about faculty, we have to consider the fact that faculty don't necessarily have to be face-to-face in front of their students anymore. We know that some learning will happen, even if you're doing it through Zoom. Partners, spouses, husbands and wives are no longer trapped by each other's jobs. It's okay for one person to say, hey, I want to move 2,500 miles away to do this job. How's that going to work for you? And the other person to go, not a problem, because I can just do mine all online. I won't even have to go through a job search, right? So this freedom of geographic location changes the way we have to think about how we're going to bring people into a department, especially a department focused on education, where we do preach that much of our instruction should happen face-to-face so that we're modeling what should happen in a classroom. It's going to be different for us, right? Also, some other little administrative things. Employees want clear paths to promotion. So when you're talking about things like faculty, when you think about the DEP and how does it read, this is going to make a huge difference to folks who decide to come or not come, depending on how complicated that is for them to figure out. They want to be able to go, if I check these boxes, am I going to get promoted? If I check these boxes, am I going to be full professor? And good leaders will make sure there are no hidden hurdles. And this comes back to that mentorship cycle, right? Which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Next up, of course, is salary. Who doesn't want a whole bunch of money? Okay, I don't want a whole bunch of money. I just want some money. I was a teacher for 20 years in rural Northeast Missouri. My demand for money is obviously not super high. But it's the truth that wage collapse is no longer ignored by faculty and staff. It used to be the case that someone would go, hey, it seems like I'm not making very much money. And someone above them would go, yeah, we call that wage collapse. And then that meeting was over. That's not the case anymore. People are like, my partner is going to get a job 2,500 miles away and I'm going with them. So wage collapse is not ignored anymore, especially since all you have to do is get on the Google and type in, I want to know how much money Sue Fondry made last year. And it will tell me, right? Faculty in higher education are demanding more retention bonuses than ever before. This is in the past 5 years. Ever before. They're going, no, you hired in 3 new people. They're all making $10,000 more from me. Close that gap, or I'm just going to go somewhere else. And here's the kicker. It used to be the case that administrators could say, find another job. Prove to us that you have another offer at another institution, and then we'll match that. And now people go, all right, and now I'm taking that, right? It used to be a game that people with geographic priority, right? My spouse has a job here. My kids go to school here. I'm going to have to stay here. So I'm going to play this game and maybe they'll match it and maybe they won't. But now if they get that offer, they're going to take it. So this game's not so easy for the administrators to play anymore. Because if folks get another offer and they happen to like what it's attached to better, they'll take it because they don't necessarily have to move. Their kids can still go to the same state, right? And that really changes the way those negotiations happen. All right, so that was all the bad parts. Whew, got that out of the way. Let's talk about happy stuff. What makes us stay in our jobs? So many people say, I love my job. I say it all the time. I absolutely love my job. Why do I say that? Well, I love my work environment, right? I've got people that I work with that give me freedom. They trust me to do what I say I'm going to do. They give me something to do, and then I go do it. Nobody hovers, right? There's a lot of autonomy. Most folks are happiest when they're allowed to work 16 hours per week from home, remote, whatever you want to call that. That's approximately 2 work days a week. And as professors, as faculty, we probably get to play with that a little bit more than the staff, but it is something that should be considered for staff. Like, how often can we allow them to do that emailing from home instead of from in the office? And it is absolutely the case that employees will take a lower salary if they get longer periods of vacation, if they get those work from home hours that they want, if they have flexible hours, they will stay. They will stick around. They'll say, it's okay. I don't want an extra $5,000, even though $5,000 doesn't make up for the fact that I'm going to have to be literally physically in my office 40 hours per week, right? People will exchange that. Mentorship. Mentorship's a huge thing. Faculty and staff rely on mentorship to be able to navigate structures. So many structures in all systems. So many of those things that we had, hoops that we have to jump through, are kind of hidden. So what type of mentorship is going to bring those out to life so that everyone understands what they are? And what are we doing to help them make improvements in their work? Folks like to feel like they have a purpose. So what purpose have you given them? And then how are you supporting them to be successful in that purpose? And last but not least, folks want social connections. It's, human beings, a whole bunch of us are social creatures. And some folks, even though they identify as introverts, I would be one of those on the Myers-Briggs, I'm a 98% I. So where do I get my social interactions? At work, right? I don't go home and then go out to a party of 200 people. I go home and stay home. So I want my hellos and goodbyes to happen in the hallways. They don't have to be huge social interactions, but folks want that at work. They don't want to walk into work and feel like there's no connection between them and their colleagues. All right, so mentorship, like I said, this is a huge part of how we get people to stay. How do we create safety and care and comfort for the folks that are working for us and with us? Scholes and Flores, 2020, this is my favorite mentorship cycle. Of course, there's 9,000 mentorship cycles. If you want to look at different ones, you can find them. But this is my favorite one because it's never ending. You can see that the loop just goes on and on forever. You never get to stop mentoring. Once you start, you're in it for life. So big keys. And again, since it's a forever circle, none of these is most important. Any of these 5 things could be most important at any specific moment, if that makes sense. So there are times when nurturing strong relationships is going to be most important. Probably when somebody's very new to their position, new to the department. That's probably going to be really important. Giving critical feedback. We need those new folks to grow, right? So how are we going to give them feedback in a way that makes them both feel appreciated, but also actually makes them grow? That's the part of critical care theory that a lot of times folks leave out. If you don't have high expectations for folks, then they're never going to improve. And everybody wants to always feel like they're doing that, right? Like everybody likes to be like, oh yeah, I'm doing this better than I was before. This feedback that you gave me was really useful. Implementing a support plan. What is it that we're going to do to help these folks feel supported? And these support plans are very, very different than critical feedback, right? Support plans might involve an accountability buddy. Accountability buddies are not giving critical feedback. They're just walking by going, hey, are you doing that thing we talked about? And then they keep walking, right? It's not a critique of whether or not you've done it. It's just, are you doing it? All right, let's meet 1 hour a week and we'll both work on it. Okay, those are very different. And that support can look very different for different folks. It could be that someone has a 3-year-old at home. So the support mostly revolves around, we know that it's easier for you if with the 3-year-old, you don't have to be here until 10. So don't come till 10 every day. And that's going to count towards those 16 hours that you get to work from home, right? However you do that. Deepen knowledge in an area of concern. This is kind of a home run for most professor types because we kind of like to read and we kind of like to learn and we kind of like to think about research and those kinds of things. So that one it may be the case in departments full of professors that's not one that gets highlighted that often, but usually we can come up with something that we want to work specifically on. Like maybe it is a new pedagogy that we want to implement, or the whole campus took on the transparent design framework, right? Was that 2 years ago, 3 years ago? So that's something that we were kind of handed, hey, deepen your knowledge on how you're writing your lesson plans, because it can make a huge difference in the way that your students react to the information you're putting out. And of course, reflection, right? There's no good cycle that doesn't involve reflection by the person themselves. You know, I've got the support going on. Here's some feedback for me. What did I do over the past month to implement these things? And or what am I going to do in the next month to implement those things? So, all right. We're doing good. Swinging it back around to social opportunities. One thing that many places are putting into place are affinity groups. Most faculty and staff do want opportunities to socialize with coworkers. Affinity groups are groups of people that all have one trait in common, at least one. Many times they have other traits, but at least one. So lots of times these groups might center around being a BIPOC group, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. An LGBTQ plus group might exist. A group for parents, a group for pregnant women. You know, there's all kinds of these groups. I always like to say that my affinity group for the first 3 semesters that I worked here was the carpool. So for those of you that don't know, I live in St. Paul, and there is a distinct group of people on campus. I like to call us distinct. We all seem to be a little bit different than other people because we choose to drive an hour and 15 minutes to work. And in that fall of my first year, at that point, there were about 30 people doing that. So we had 3 different carpools from the Twin Cities to Eau Claire. I was part of one of those 3 carpools. And I can tell you that without a doubt, that was my affinity group. Because what do you do if you're riding in a car for an hour and 15 minutes? Everybody gets in, you shut the doors, you get on the interstate, and then you go, well, how was everyone's day? Right? And then you start talking. And we have a lot to talk about. You know, people are from different departments, people are from different colleges. What does it mean to work in your college versus what it means to work in my college? I was brand new. So I would come to the carpool and go, folks, the weirdest thing happened today. I walked into my office and there was a letter from my department chair just on my desk, and it had a number in it. And I think it was called a, I don't know, APR or something, but there was definitely a number in it. And I don't know what it means, right? Carpool was great for that. Nobody in the carpool was in my department. Nobody in the carpool was going to go, well, Kyle, that's a terrible number. First off, you're obviously going to get fired. I mean, you know, right? Like they don't have any dog in this race. So they just spelled it out for me. Here's what that number means. Here's why you need to care about it. And here's why you don't need to care about it. You know, and that was a great affinity group for me because I got lots of mentorship, lots and lots of mentorship from folks who did not really have to worry about like the offshoots of the things that they would say. Because we were in different departments and mostly different colleges, we could be very blunt and frank and open about, you know, the importance of this and the unimportance of that and what it means for the college as a whole. So it was great. I learned a ton. For those of you that remember him, Jim Oberly was in that carpool, and I cannot possibly think of a better source for historical information about the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire than to be riding with him for an hour and 15 minutes 3 times a week. All right, department culture. Again, this still is wrapped up in mentorship. What kind of culture do we have? Well, there's all these things that are super important that go into making this great culture. Now we're moving a little bit away from mentorship, but it's still in there. So leadership should model good collaboration. You can't have a good functioning department. You can't have a great culture in your department if your leader is not willing to collaborate with folks. This working relationship and what are we going to work on together has to be top down. You need to invest in team building. And I'm going to talk a lot about that in a minute because that's actually what I did to implement my project. Encourage partnerships. And then make sure everybody serves a purpose. Like I said, everyone wants to feel like they're serving a purpose. So what's your job? What's your role? What is it that we need from you? Even if it's for a short amount of time. The next 3 months, we're really going to need you to X, Y, Z. And work-life balance, again, come back to that well-being of, you know, I'm going to get to work remotely some of the All right, so for my project, what I actually implemented, because all the rest of that stuff was sort of like the lit review, right? So the implementation was that because we were such an emergent department, 4 out of our 6 members had been new in the last 2 years out of our 6-member department. So we engaged in monthly activities. We purposely scheduled those on the same day as our college meetings so that we would have 2 meetings to attend that day, not back to back. There was an hour break in between, but that way folks had a good reason to be there. And each member was the leader once. So we had 6 different people take on different topics. You could pick anything you want. They could talk about anything you want. So for instance, I started it off just to do modeling, and I talked about what it's like to camp in the Boundary Waters. Brought in actual like backpacks and the whole thing. Dr. Fondry talked about imposter syndrome. There was a thing on how to get over writer's block. One of our folks talked about how to make quilting squares, and this had us do this really fun thing with paint and shaving cream. And we met for an hour. And during that hour, one person would be the presenter, everybody else would ask questions. And it just gave us a reason to talk about stuff outside of educational techniques. Just a way for the 6 of us to get to know each other better and on a different level. The results were pretty outstanding. The attendance was nearly perfect. We had 1 faculty member with a young child miss twice for illness. Either the person was sick or the young child was sick, but everybody else was there the entire time. They shared that they enjoyed learning with and about one another. We all learned something about our colleagues in a way that we would not have necessarily without these. And now we have a new foundation based on mutual respect and admiration. It's the case that, when you know something more personal about somebody, the way that you interact with them can be slightly different, right? We did have a new member added to our department this year, who I think states pretty often that she's fairly astounded at how well we seem to get along. We have a new member joining next year who is so excited to join us that he has been emailing / going out to eat with different groups of us at different times, came to the Twin Cities to meet me and my partner for dinner once, and who just defended her dissertation. So we got to remember to send her an email. So that's really exciting that we have somebody that's not technically supposed to join us until August, but it sort of feels like they already have. It's not that we don't go without conflict. Of course we do. We're a group of human beings working together. Most of the time when we have conflicts, not shocking, it's tied to hiring. There were only 6 of us. We need more of us. Who are we going to pick? How are we going to pick them? Are we going to use a rubric? Are we going to do it holistically? Is it going to be analytic? These kinds of things. But we also, because we're growing and are setting new norms, we have to do things like, what are our department goals? What's our DEP going to contain? The DEP was written by folks who retired 5 years ago now. Is that stuff still relevant to how university systems work today, right? And those things are stressful things to do. So not surprisingly, they come with some conflict. Conflict resolution has been swift. It's gone well. Leadership has stepped in when necessary. Even after a conflict, department members still are functioning well as collaborators and as teams. And in a time of real need, folks have stepped forward to give real support. So, if somebody's been ill or somebody needs someone to cover their class, we have taken care of that for them. And that hasn't been one of those situations where you go, well, I'm not doing it for that person. You know what I mean? It's not like that. So again, it's not that our department is conflict free. It's just that when we have a conflict, it gets resolved rather quickly. That's it. Any questions? Right? Let you process. Yes.
So thinking about bringing on you had a new person start this year and then a people coming in next year. Are you thinking of continuing some of those sessions where you get to know each other, continuing as you're bringing people into the fold?
Yeah. So just to restate your question for the crowd, I feel like you're saying, are you going to continue team building as new folks enter into the fold? I think we will probably repeat that. I would guess not next year, but maybe the year after. Because we were down so many folks, we're even trying to still hire 2 more. So if we could get those 2 more folks on, then it would be really beneficial to do those team building events again the year they're new. So, yeah, I think it would start to get monotonous if we did it every single year. So, yeah. Other question? Yes.
Your ideas with respect to mentoring, and I'm specifically thinking about, at least the university has talked for several years about setting up some kind of mentoring programs for newer faculty. We have some mentoring programs within CEDL, for instance. But I also fear that probably at the department level, this is also really beneficial. I know that from my own experience. So can you talk a little more about what you would see as kind of an ideal mentoring plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is about mentorship, and we do as a university have a mentorship program. I think in general, we try to set folks up with other folks outside of their departments. And I would agree that that's a great idea because like I mentioned about carpool, it's very safe to ask someone who has no control over your promotion, what this number means, or, what do I do in this situation? But yes, I also agree that within departments, you definitely need some mentorship. That's how you highlight those hidden norms, right? Because folks who aren't in the department don't know about the hidden norms. They also would be like, oh, that's not written down anywhere. But this is just how we all do it. And so things like an example of a narrative that you turn in with your portfolio, for instance, right? Within your own department, it can be very, very scary to say, well, here's my 2-page narrative of what I've done for the last 16 years, right? And then have somebody go, well, usually they're longer than that if it's been 16, right? That can feel really, really terrifying in a way, because there's going to be some sort of judgment there. But at the same time, if you don't have at least folks in your DPC mentoring folks who are not yet in it, if you don't at least have that, those folks who are not yet in it are going to be missing stuff, because they're not going to know that it helps if when you're talking about your publications to list what percent of the publication you actually constructed if you're a co-author with 2 other people. Did you actually do a third of it? Did you actually do 97% of it? And those other 2 people just gave you data? Like, if they don't know to do that, then they're going to be missing out on a key part. So we definitely pair people up in our department. And it was not like that in the fall of 2018 when I came. There was no pairing of people up. But we now have a system where folks who have been through the tenure process are paired with folks who do not yet have tenure, so that those things don't get missed. And I would say it's, super important. Like who has an example of a portfolio narrative just handy to hand somebody who's not within their own disciplinary area, it doesn't make sense. So you have to have that, I would say. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Yes.
But one comment I wanted to that activity shared with the slide as well. So I guess my question is, I'm coming into the public education here, and when you talked about kind of that activity that you did to build connection in the community, what kind of suggestions did that activity lend itself to, a public education setting, if you have recommendations how to build that kind of thing in public education?
Yeah, well, of course, teacher to teacher, you can do that same thing, but it definitely stemmed from the connections I make with my students, right? And so when you're teaching in a public school, if you're teaching in the secondary areas, students usually have 5 or 6 minutes between classes to get one place to another. And invariably, there are students who come from next door, and there are students who come from across campus, right? So the ones who come from next door are in there for a while. And so you can say things like, hey, what'd you do over the weekend? And it really does build strong connections, even if they're doing something over the weekend that isn't necessarily in your bag of, this sounds exciting, you are at least learning about that thing from them. So like, for instance, the quilting squares thing, I was like, I don't know, I feel a little nervous. I'm going to do what with the paint and the shading cream? And I have to put my hands right. They're just going to go in there, I would never do that on my own, but, having a group of people engage in that activity gives you all something that you've done together that you can talk about. Like, remember that time? And so, yes, definitely that stemmed from how I made connections with my students. Yeah.
Yes.
So, one of the nice things about thinking about this is we all agree that not I don't think we're as effective as we think. I think we still have room for continuing improvement. But the care, the physical care, the care is what you said. What we, and I'm thinking back to going on and one day there's another that was supposed to run in the middle of it. So there's about one.
That's what
happened. Maybe so to be implemented within a mentorship conference or what, based on your research, is my question to you then. What would be the approach to strengthening and
Got it. Yeah. So the question is, if you already have a mentoring program and you're fairly happy with it, but you want to take it up just a notch and have it be stronger, what suggestions would I have? And I would go back to this encouraging of partnerships. Is it possible that some partnerships are being missed out on because of the way you're structuring the mentorship across departments? Is there a way to create partnerships within a given department that will just make the mentoring that much stronger? And I would say that it could be a completely separate component. Like, here's your mentor from the other department across the college, and here is your mentor from our department. Maybe those two people talk about things and maybe they don't, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that this person in the department knows the hoops for the department. Gotcha. Then I would probably go into, do you have certain protocols in place for different mentoring meetings? Like, is it the case that you have 2 meetings a year that follow a very specific protocol in order to enhance whatever topic it is that happens to be important in that particular semester? Because giving folks some structure is almost always more beneficial than harmful, if that makes sense. It can be the case, and I do appreciate the CETL work on mentorship, but it can be the case that if there's not enough in common, if the mentee and the mentor are so far apart in things like, what type of research they're doing, if they don't have a protocol to follow, all they do is say, how are you doing? And the person says, fine. And you consider that a mentor meeting and you're golden and you've checked it off your list, right? So without some sort of structure in place that says specifically in this month, we want you to mentor about, boom, and maybe it is that narrative, I don't know, but have a thing, whatever the thing is. Maybe it's a something that showed up in a teaching evaluation, right? Specifically, we're going to talk about your implementation of EDI in your classroom. That's going to be our focus for today. And, so that there's a jumping off point. Yeah, I hope that made sense. Okay. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question at first. Oh, yeah.
For one thing, as the chair, I get to spend, weeks of my life going through training, and it's like sessions way through like fire to fire. And some of the things that you're saying here, if those things had been in that workshop, I could have really benefited from that. So I think that structurally, as a university, our HR needs to lead with some of these ideas. Because what you're saying about bringing people in and making them feel welcome, and you say, we're going to have somebody who hasn't even started the job yet, and invite them to be part of our group, and even though you don't have to do that, you're setting somebody up for success. And that's really profound and powerful, because I think sometimes we deal so much with the formal structure of the organization, not enough with the organizational culture, which is in the end what creates loyalty to the organization, so that we do believe and loyalty here, despite what is happening in special ed and everything else. But I think it's really important what you're saying. I would get the word on. I sometimes feel, you know, we talk as academics and we're sometimes get converted talking about these issues, but the broader message that it needs to go to staff at the universities is what bigger than this, correct? I put that as a, you know, as a thought to say, hey, how do we do more with this? Because I think it's quite powerful. More people here in a time of declining ability to hire those people who can't afford to replace the union.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'm supposed to repeat what you said. I'm gonna say that you said hire to retire. Yeah,
Formal. When you start telling us to get there when they hire us, you know, ought to be about our this university, this is how we model before you go to college.
yeah, for sure. And you know, critical care theory at its core is care. Out of the three things, you know, we say that there's the criticality, being aware of critical structures and the way that systems are created to possibly privilege some folks over others. There's care. We're going to show love. We're going to, you know, actually display that we truly do care about one another. And then there's those high expectations. But, you know, when you engage with folks electronically that you know aren't starting until August in the form of things like, how's that dissertation coming along? Do you have a defense date set? Because we all want to wish you luck. You know, I mean, that takes 10 seconds. And yet the offshoot of that is that this person who otherwise might feel unsettled and sort of insecure and definitely have imposter syndrome, like, right? We all as professors, those first couple of years are just full of, oh my gosh, I'm in the wrong space. I don't deserve to be here. Almost feeling guilty that somebody hired us instead of somebody else, can really help bridge that gap and help that person sort of jump over that, you know, and create that drive to be here because the culture here is so accepting and so welcoming. And I'm going to be supported whether I get sick or my toddler gets sick or whatever. Yes, that stuff's super, super important. Yes, in the back.
Well, that idea of building a culture of care, it's very easy to bail on a job if you feel we're not capable about what we don't care about people.
For sure. So the question is, how do you build a culture of care? So the response to that is, from me, is always the same. People can watch care happen, right? Like everyone in this room would be able to say, oh, that person just showed care to that person if I asked you to. It's actually observable. And what happens with care is that you put forth, hey, Pam, I think you're really cool. And I really appreciate all the work that you do here. And that's all you can do, right? Pam gets to decide, all with their own independent being and body, whether or not that was sincere, whether that was meaningful, whether or not that feels good, or is that too much? Like, settle down, Kyle. Take it back a notch, right? So the person who gets the care shoved at them, so to speak, gets to decide whether or not to accept it. And in order for the culture to be one of care, when someone puts forth that care, the person who is on the other end receives it, right? That's how you know you've got a culture of care. When somebody says, have a good trip home, Kyle, don't hit any deer on the way. And we all interpret that in Wisconsin as, we love you and we don't want you to die in a car wreck. If I'm like, you know, I don't care that you said that, then I'm not receiving the care and we haven't changed the culture. But if it's like, I promise to avoid the deer, then now, right? That's the culture. And the best way to do it is just do it over and over and over again, right? You put out the care over and over and over again. This is the big push on teachers. You know, when you're dealing with adolescents and young tots who maybe aren't capable because of home life, trauma, or whatever else, of accepting care in the way that we consider a normal way to accept care, but you keep putting it out, eventually they will, right? It's honeys and flies and vinegar and whatever that saying is, right? You know, eventually they will. So if you've got a new person coming to your department and you want to make them feel special and make them feel like they're super excited to be there, for them to be there, tell them. Don't just walk up and down the halls and high fives everybody on the hiring committee and go, look what we did, we're so great. If you're not telling the person that you're bringing in then it doesn't matter. They're the ones who need to have that carrot shoved at them, right? And it needs to happen, especially today, because it's too easy to back out of a contract now. It's too easy to say, nope, I got this other offer, I like it better. It's really, really important to maintain that line of, I'm going to keep pointing out that I'm excited that you're going to be here.